Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Big topic on the table today, the college football playoff rankings from last night and the continued thought process of this committee that I think a lot of people – now, listen, I hope you respect this about me, and there's plenty about me that maybe you don't respect. You have a right to. The one thing I hope you respect is that I don't try to pretend to be something I'm not. Of course, I am a Georgia guy. This is a pro-Georgia show. I'm a Georgia fan. You're Georgia fans. Most of you are. So we do this show from a pro-Georgia perspective. But here's the thing to understand, is that the complaints about the College Football Playoff Selection Committee right now go beyond just they're sort of sticking it to my team. It's a really big topic right now where I think a lot of people, including Kirby Smart, who we're going to hear from, I think that the overall thought process and the discussion from that thought process put on display by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is not good for the sport and potentially ruinous for the sport. So we're going to talk about that today. It is a very big topic. That means I need some extra help to let us do it today. Davin Bellamy stops by. He'll be a part of that. The great former Dawg, Mike Griffith, stops by. Mike spent some time last night with Ware Manuel, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee chairman. So we're going to do all of that. And we're going to go through today why it is that Georgia fans are upset, why it is that SEC fans are upset, and why it is that some of these paper tigers with pretty records with absolutely no substantial wins to speak of seem to be getting such a glossy treatment by this committee here right now. A lot of emotion around it, so we'll see where it all goes. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
This is one of those days where there's a lot of opinions flying on our show, of course, but other places too. You go on social media, everybody's just sort of shouting about last night's college football playoff top 25. And some of this goes beyond just the actual rankings themselves. And I think it's really important for me, because, listen, I'm an emotional creature like anybody else is. I think it's really important for me to try to catalog those emotions and sort of talk in a way that hopefully makes sense in kind of a clear, easy-to-understand way. And so I think in order to do that, so it just doesn't sound like more like noise pollution of, blah, 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 shout, 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 shout. I think it's important to sort of state a couple of things off the top. So last night the rankings come out. Georgia is 10th in those rankings. It moves up a little bit after a fairly thorough and dominant win over a previously top 10 ranked Tennessee team. Do with that what you will. Georgia moves up just a little bit. So we're obviously a little bit bothered by that today, but there are things that bother us even more. So let me kind of go through a couple of thoughts here, then I want to let you hear from some of the official particulars involved. Let me start with this. Not everything about the latest college football playoff rankings is a huge problem for me. For instance, I don't have a ton of beef with like Ohio State and Oregon right now. Oregon has beaten Ohio State. They beat Boise State. They've been, with the exception of this past week against Wisconsin, for the most part, handling their business in a pretty convincing fashion. I don't have any dispute that Oregon's probably a pretty good team. Are they the best team in the country? Maybe not. Are they a team that is contending to be the best? Absolutely. So no beef for me with Oregon right now. I'm, believe it or not, even a little bit similar about Ohio State, too. Ohio State hasn't proven very much in this regular season thus far. The only real game of note they've played, they lost to Oregon. I don't count Penn State here because Penn State's never beaten anyone of consequence for as long as any of us can remember. So that's not really the kind of thing that lands on my radar very much, probably yours either. But even if Ohio State really hasn't proven it very much in this season yet, we're also not idiots, right? We can certainly imagine that if Georgia played Ohio State on a neutral field tomorrow, that'd probably be a pretty tough game. It was a tough game a couple of years ago. It'd probably be a tough game again. No real beef for me with Ohio State or Oregon, those two teams from the Big Ten. As a Georgia guy, I don't have much of an argument right now for both Ole Miss and Alabama being rated ahead of Georgia. I think that outcomes have consequences. Georgia lost those games. And even if they were on the road, and even if Georgia's playing a larger collection of tough games than most anybody else is, they still lost those games. Ole Miss certainly looked very good in beating Georgia, and Alabama certainly had a very good first quarter that allowed it to coast the rest of the way. Alabama and Ole Miss being ranked ahead of Georgia, no real issue for me. Here are where my issues lie. It's with teams like Miami, who has beaten no one. Why are they ranked ahead of Georgia right now? Why are teams like Penn State and Indiana ranked ahead of Georgia right now? And that's been true for the last couple of weeks. Like 4 of the top 5 teams in this college football playoff are teams from the Big Ten. Is there any universe in which that's true? Why is Notre Dame ranked ahead of Georgia right now? What has Notre Dame proven? They lost to Northern Illinois, but what have they proven? And perhaps, most prominently of all, why is Texas ranked ahead of Georgia right now? Why are these teams with such flimsy resumes, why are they ranked ahead of Georgia? And right now, the perhaps bigger beef for me, because as I said, I don't mind Ole Miss and Alabama being ranked ahead of Georgia. Why is it that if the season ended today and the top 12 we saw last night, if that was the actual college football playoff, why is it that SEC teams, Bama, Ole Miss, and Georgia, would all 3 be going on the road, and all of these, I think, weak-looking Big Ten teams who have nice records but no real wins to speak of, why do they all get to host these home games? Why does Notre Dame get to host a home game? Why is it that these teams are getting what appears to be a level of preferential treatment that the likes of the SEC, who are obviously competing against each other and therefore beating each other up a little bit, why does it seem like they're not getting that sort of thing here right now? And Kirby Smart, by the way, was posed that question last night. When you look at where the Big Ten teams continually are ranked and the fact that a team like Georgia is sort of barely even in the top 10 right now, even after winning Tennessee, comfortable margin, at Texas, comfortable margin, only lost the year for the Longhorns, blowout against Clemson, how come that doesn't get any credit? And how come the Indianas, the Penn States, are just loving life here right now? And I think that Kirby Smart gave a pretty good answer as to what this committee is looking at right now, this after he was pretty critical of the group on Saturday. I think that Kirby got it right last night. This is what Kirby said.
I don't think they value the Big Ten over the SEC. I think they value wins and losses. And so they place people based on a column, the column of wins and the column of losses, not on the eye test of going to watch them play and see them and see who they play. I just don't think I think they base it on wins and losses. I don't think they say, well, this is better than that. They just say this record's better than that. And that's the most simple way to do it. It's not necessarily the 12 best. So but we'll see what happens. I'm not worried about it much. I got to worry about our team and what we got going on.
Without anything to add, no notes whatsoever, Kirby's just 100% right for the most part. And this is, by the way, one of the reasons why the week-to-week rankings do sort of matter, because it's a continuation of what's been true now for the last 10 years. For the most part, the committee only looks at the number of losses you have. The teams with 0 losses get treated a certain way. The teams with 1 loss get treated another way. And then the 2-loss teams get treated worse than that. And up until this year, we've never seen a 2-loss team make the college football playoff, because all this committee, even though they're the purported experts, and even though they fly to Grapevine, Texas, and they stay in $1,000 a night hotel suites, and they rack up, 3-figure hundreds of dollars worth of, expense account dinners and things like that. They live a very lavish life to do what 12 idiots could do, which is say, well, this team's got a better record than this team, so therefore they must be better. And Kirby's right to call that out. He was obviously critical on Saturday. We played those clips for you yesterday, and he's right to call that out here right now. And the point that I made a moment ago, it's not just like the Indianas and the Penn States, the world teams that I don't – listen, Indiana would be a homecoming opponent for Georgia. And I know that makes me sound like a redneck for saying that. Georgia would beat Indiana by 4 touchdowns. I don't care what somebody's analytical, SP plus, calculator math nerd stuff says. Those are the same people that have been bragging about Gonzaga in the basketball tournament for years. They never do anything. And Indiana's not winning a game against Georgia. It's just not. I don't believe that Penn State would either. I just don't have any respect whatsoever for those Big Ten teams, and I don't need any formula to tell me differently. I know what Georgia does. It beats Clemson 34-3 like it did to begin this season. It beats Oregon 49-3 like it did to start the year in 2022. It beats Michigan badly in the Orange Bowl like it did in 2021. When's the last time Georgia lost a game to a ranked non-conference opponent? When's the last time, other than obviously to Ohio State's credit, in 2022, a game like that was even close? I don't want to hear a word about any of these Big Ten teams matching up against Georgia. It is a total farce. It is a total joke. But, as I mentioned, It's not just the Big Ten teams that Georgia ought to have issue with here right now. Why is Texas ranked ahead of Georgia? And frankly, why is Texas ranked so far ahead of Georgia? As we've said, and I joked about this with our R.S. Andrews School down the other day. Somebody asked me about where Georgia should be ranked. I said, listen, I don't care if you rank them 20th. I don't care if you rank them 10th. I don't care if you rank them 2nd. They ought to be ranked ahead of Texas because they went to Austin and they beat Texas badly, and that's the only game of consequence Texas has played all season long. And you want to let your blood boil for a minute? I want you to listen here. This is from last night's teleconference. This is audio only. This is the selection committee chairman, Ware Manuel, happens to be the Michigan athletic director. Listen to the just absolute word salad of an answer he offers in trying to explain why Texas is better than Georgia, ranked ahead of Georgia. This is total nonsense, and your anger with how they're treating Texas ought to be as equal, if not, more significant than how you feel about the way in which these Big Ten teams are being treated right now. Listen to Ware Manuel try to explain why Texas is ranked ahead of Georgia.
Well, obviously, Georgia had a very good win at Texas, but as the committee analyzed the body of work of Texas versus where Georgia is at this present time with 2 losses, even to top 25 teams, we came out that Texas was still a very strong team, deserving of a 3 seed. They have a top 5 defense. Quinn Ewers is leading one of the top passing offenses in the country. And so we just looked at them and thought, and came out, I should say, with them at 3. It's nothing against Georgia. Georgia's a great team, but they did struggle against Ole Miss, but had a great win this past week against Tennessee. So we will continue to monitor both teams and see how it goes in the next few weeks. I
want you to listen to that basic, elementary, rudimentary football talk. I'd take 12 guys off a message board and let them decide the college football playoff before I'd let dudes like that have a say in this. Well, we look at Texas. They got a top 5 defense. They got a good quarterback in Quinn Ewers. Did you happen to notice that when Georgia played Texas that Quinn Ewers spent most of the night on his back looking up at the lights because of what Jalen Walker and Mikael Williams and guys like that were doing to him? Do you have any comprehension of that? Do you have any ability to kind of call back and remember any of that? Were you around for that? Did you see that? And have you seen what Texas has been doing since then, struggling against the likes of an Arkansas or, scratching and clawing to get things done against Vanderbilt, for instance? That the 2 best wins for Texas all year long, as the graphic showed us on TV last night, are Arkansas and Vanderbilt. Those are the best wins of the year for Texas here thus far. Shouldn't that matter? This is why I would trust the average common fan to pick the playoff more so than guys like this, because what Ware Manuel was actually even brave enough to admit last night is when it comes to complicated topics like who has played whom and the difficulty of some schedules compared to others, this committee is basically sort of throwing their hands up and saying, we're actually not all that capable of making those kinds of evaluations. This is, I think, a shocking quote. I think it's a damning and condemning quote for the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. And frankly, folks, this doesn't get any better at the end of this process than it is right here in the middle. Listen to the inability of Ware Manuel to kind of process how some schedules being tougher than others fits into the overall conversation over who the 12 most deserving teams are. This is Ware Manuel again from last night.
It's hard to, as we look at all of these teams, they're playing different schedules. It's not, the fault of one team who doesn't have a stronger schedule or who they're playing on their in their conference opponents. I mean, these conferences have increased in size, and so there are less matchups where you are matching the top teams in the league each week, each weekend, and so it does make it difficult to assess the teams, even with the strength of schedule. We have to rely on how the teams are playing and who they're playing, as well as how the other teams, regardless of strength of schedule, are playing their opponents. And so we take a look at it holistically. Strength schedule is a component. It's an important data point to us and for us, but it is not the only assessment that we make.
I mean, I just think that's a shocking statement. I really do. And I don't want to over-dramatize this, but that's the kind of thing that doesn't just ruin this year's playoff. It potentially ruins the sport. We're going to talk more about this here in a moment. Of what if you incentivize good records at the expense of good games? And, y'all, we have precedent of this in sports. Some of you are my age, if not older. You remember there was a time in which boxing was one of the most popular sports in the world. And over the course of time, boxers learned, well, it's bad to lose, therefore it's better not to fight. And all of a sudden now you can't make good fights against heralded boxers because somebody loses and that loss cost you money. So therefore, I'm sort of better to protect myself by not fighting or only fighting tomato cans. Now, eventually I'll get the big payday, and that fight may be a dud, but at least I protected my record long enough to get the big payday. Y'all, we saw boxing go from being one of the most popular sports in the world to essentially being a non-entity other than, you know, sideshow, carny stuff like what was on Netflix this past Friday. We saw boxing totally ruined by the kind of attitude that's potentially invading college football if guys like Ware Manuel have their way. And listen, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I also don't want to be dishonest. I wouldn't trust Ware Manuel to manage a tire store. I wouldn't. I don't think that Ware Manuel could get a job managing a hardware store. I don't. I think people like this are just not overly bright. I don't think they're super competent. I think they have managed the system well, and therefore they get to sit in the expensive hotel suite in Grapevine, Texas. When it comes to making the big boy decisions, the sort of tough decisions, don't trust them to do it. I would trust any of you. Heck, I'll go on an Alabama podcast. I'll let those fans make the decision more so than sort of the bureaucrats like this. And I think, as I said before, it has the potential to ruin more than just the season. If you're not careful, it has the potential to ruin the sport. And I mean that in all seriousness. However, there's also a silver lining to this. Because have you noticed what's been going on as of late? Now, listen, we can't control what the committee does. They may send Georgia to State College. They may send Georgia to Siberia. They may leave them out. We have no control over that. We really don't. But have you noticed what the last couple of days have been? Kirby Smart sort of joined the fight. You know, we've been arguing for a while. Last year, we were all over this committee for leaving Georgia out of that playoff. And frankly, we took some heat even from some Georgia fans for kind of, our fighting spirit around all of that. But it was the right thing to do then. It's still the right thing to do now. Kirby a year ago, and we said this, we kind of gently called Kirby out for this. We thought he could have fought for his team more forcefully a year ago than he did. That was true then. It is not true now. He fought for this team when the officials tried to do whatever it was they did in Austin that night. He fought for them around the playoff rankings after the game against Tennessee. Kirby is speaking out in a way that I think is really pretty fun right now. And I think is really I think there's a lot to appreciate about the way that Kirby Smart is doing that right now. And in fact, last night he also talked more about that, about why it is that, Kirby's just sort of out there and maybe a little bit more outspoken, a little bit more of a forceful spokesman for his team than perhaps he's been in the past. This is good from Kirby. Take a listen to this.
No, I don't think it's any different. I don't really know that I had a lot to say the 2 years previous. I mean, there wasn't a lot there. The year that we were 14-1 and 15-0, there's not a lot of complaints. There's not a lot to fight for. You take care of business on the field, handle your business. You don't have to say a lot of things. I mean, that was a pretty unique situation if you're referring to Texas. I mean, I don't know that I've ever been a part of anything like that. And I wasn't upset with him. I just didn't understand. I've never seen that happen. But I would have said that any year. I don't know what else you're referring to in terms of stepping out. I just, want to fight for my team and fight for our program because I think we got a deserving group of young men who work really hard, and I'm sure every coach would fight for their guys.
So this committee is going to do what it wants to do. But guess what? Kirby Smart, he wants to fight for his guys. And we've seen him fight for them after the game against Texas when the officials made some crazy decisions. And we've seen him fight for his team after the College Ball Playoff Selection Committee. At least the week-to-week stuff has made some pretty crazy decisions too. Kirby's not letting nonsense stand right now. And so the fact that he's now willing to speak out and do what's right and fight for UGA, I think that speaks pretty well of the future. We can't control the committee, but Georgia can control how hard it fights. And this is a team that's ready to fight all the way to the end. And I like that a lot. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Happy to have you with us. We've got to pick up the pace here a little bit. Video 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960, podcast, wherever you find them. Just happy to have you as a part of our program. So thankful to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible there as well. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And listen, you want to make Georgia stronger and better? Support those who support UGA. And that's one of the things that Breda Pest Management's all about. And this is one of those things where it's not just like prestigious to say, hey, I work with the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. It's also of benefit to you. When you make the switch to Breda Pest Management, when you choose them for your termite protection, for instance, you're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that choice. Everybody right now trying to be as wise as they can about finding ways to sort of save themselves money when possible. Well, this is a great way to do that. More money back in your pocket. It's like your own NIL payment for yourself when you choose Breda Pest Management for your termite protection, your pest control, bugs and critters. You get those like flying squirrels in your attic, things like that. Breda Pest Management takes care of all of that for you. So find them online. It's bredapest.com. B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com for more on that. B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com. Glad to have them as a part of DawgNation Daily here today. Glad to have all of you with us, too. Glad to have two great guests. It's Davin Bellamy. Before we're done today, we'll get into all of this stuff with Davin here in a bit. Obviously, he always has plenty to say when it comes to this sort of thing. And Mike Griffith here in just a moment, too. Mike, a part of the Ware Manuel press conference we had a chance to hear from just a little bit there. And before we get into any of that, more guests, I also want to give you at least a little bit of what I think could be potentially a nightmare scenario for a lot of SEC teams, the committee perhaps themselves too. Not that they can't make a mess of even normal stuff, but I want to give you kind of a scenario that I think could be not all that unreasonable that could create some real trouble. We'll get to that here in just a little bit. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse. And it's brought to you today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, as I told you a moment ago, that in the midst of all the craziness with the committee and the rankings last night, there is a silver lining to all of this. And one of those is that Kirby Smart he's got his gloves on and he's putting up his dukes and he's fighting for Georgia. And it looks good to see Kirby in the fight, man. That is a forceful presence when he's on your side, and I love that. Here's another thing, too. I think we saw evidence last night that Kirby sort of gets something that's pretty important. And to be honest with you, this is a little bit of an abstract topic. I think in a way, there is something in college football more valuable than a national championship. I really do. And it's easier to say that now that your team has won a couple of national championships. But because when you're chasing one, and Georgia was chasing one for 40 years, when you're on the hunt, obviously the only thing that matters, we had Cody Rhodes at game day on, the Cody Rhodes line to finish the story. You just want to finish the story, win your national championship. Then you win another one. But on the other side of that, not that you don't want to win national titles. I hope Georgia wins one this year. What you realize, it's sort of the moments along the way that matter more than anything else. And I thought that Kirby Smart did a good job of touching on that last night because he was asked what I think is a very fair question. When you see these teams rewarded for playing nobody, when you see a team like you seemingly punished for playing somebody, and Clemson, by the way, too, what if Clemson doesn't play Georgia? Clemson's probably much higher in the rankings than they are. What if the sport didn't have Georgia versus Clemson or games like that? Is it now an incentive to play as weak a schedule as possible when you see how the committee behaves? I thought that Kirby gave a very good answer to that question. It's a very good question. It's a very fair question. And I thought that Kirby gave a good answer to it last night. This is what he said.
I guess the happiness of our fans. That's the incentive, right? Because fans want you to be in the playoffs, but they sure don't want you to play cupcakes. They want you to go play, quality opponents. And I like the home. I mean, going and scheduling a great team and going to play somebody in a neutral site game, a kickoff classic. I love all that stuff. So I want to do as much of that as I can, but I don't know. We'll see where all this stuff goes, guys. I don't think you can sit here right now not in the middle of it, but maybe whatever, 3/4 the way through it and truly judge it. And we all knew when they started this new process, guys, we knew that the argument would be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, first out. It's just, it seems so much bigger than your first out in basketball because there's 64 in, so nobody really cares when it's 65. When it's 12, 13, 14, it just seems so big, just like the fifth team used to be. But see what happens. I mean, everybody gets a chance to go on the field and play. That they need to really decide what they want, though, and that's the frustrating thing, because it's record-based or it's quality of opponents. It's hard to say that you shouldn't have a strength of schedule factor in there.
I'm sorry, that's just good analysis. It just is. It's just straightforward good analysis. But don't miss the part at the beginning. Y'all, this is the sort of abstract thing that I think is true. Kirby says, listen, even if it does benefit your playoff seeding to play an easier schedule, that's not what fans want. And Kirby's right about that. And I don't know if you've ever stopped to think about this, but it's true. What if I told you Georgia could win the national championship, but in order to do it, it needed to play Boise State's schedule? Would you be happy about that? What if I told you Georgia could win the national championship, but in order to do it, it had to play Indiana's schedule, what it's played thus far? Would you be happy about that? I think for most fans, they would rightly say no. In other words, Georgia's, what is it, 9-2, right? Is it 9-2? 8-2. 8-2. Georgia's 8-2 right now. But hasn't this year, say, been more fun than last year was? I mean, Georgia's had a couple of hard-fought losses, but this year has been all of this sort of week-to-week drama in a way that a much easier schedule for Georgia a year ago just didn't have. Now, this is still a tougher schedule than a lot of teams play, but the drama has been pretty good. And here is something really important to understand. You cannot control what a bunch of people in Grapevine, Texas do when they push away the shrimp cocktail and the steak tartare and get to the business of ranking these teams. You cannot control what they do. But here's what you can do in life. And this is something that Georgia's really good at. If you were lucky enough to be there on Saturday, there is no committee anywhere that can ever take that from you. And I mean it. I mean this as genuinely as my next breath. No committee can take that from you. If you were there and you soaked that up, that's yours forever, no matter what, a bunch of sort of mindless bureaucrats decide to do. Same thing if you traveled to Austin, Texas. A lot of people did. It's a very expensive trip. What a night that was. What a win that was. On that particular night, did you think much about the playoff, the national championship? I didn't. I thought about how much fun it was to be on the ground in that spot watching Georgia beat Texas. And in that particular moment, in that particular night, that's all that really mattered. And I think I've said this on the air before. I know I've said this to our video audience. Like when I was a kid in the 80s, there wasn't much of a mechanism for choosing the national championship. Essentially, all we had was the regular season. The bowl games were all kind of like predestined, preordained. About halfway through the year, there was some sort of, smoke-filled room, sort of, good old boy network that sort of determined who was going to play in what bowl game. All the sport really was the regular season. And you know what? People liked it. People enjoyed it. So if this committee ruins the playoff, I mean this. I mean this. If this committee ruins the playoff, we still have last Saturday against Tennessee. We still have October against Texas. Like, we still have those moments. And now that we've got a couple of national championships, I think we realize that it's actually the week-to-week moments that are the most fun part of all of this. And if that's all we've got, the good news is there ain't a committee anywhere that can take that from us. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And by the way, as we talk about these passionate topics that mean so much to Georgia fans, the great news about great sponsors like Georgia Farm Bureau, they get all this too, because they are a Georgian just like you are. They're always the home team, and that means when it comes to things you have to have, like auto insurance and stuff like that, the friendly folks, the great agents, the claims adjusters, all the people that are part of that process, hey, you get a chance to work with them and know that you're working with somebody who's just as interested in living a great life in our great state as you are, and wants to help you with that and understands the way in which their services around insurance needs can help get all that done. So please give them a call. It's 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com. It's great to have Georgia Farm Bureau. They're always the home team, and they're a big part of Around the Doghouse here for us here today. All right, we've got so much to do. Davin Bellamy coming up. I've got a little bit of what might be a nightmare scenario in the SEC when it comes to the college football playoff. But for more on last night, what it means going forward, let's talk to Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So let me bring in Mike Griffith here. And Mike, you know me. Obviously, we do this show from a pro-Georgia perspective. Of course, I'm going to argue on behalf of Georgia, because if we don't, who will? Of course, that's the case. But honestly, my beef last night isn't so much about Georgia as it is the entire treatment of the SEC, the propping up of the Miamis, the Notre Dames, the Indianas, Texas included, Penn State, these teams that really don't have any wins of consequence all year long. And as I said multiple times before you joined us, the decision-making process here doesn't potentially ruin this year's playoff. It has the risk of like messing up the sport long term if big games are no longer incentivized. What do you make of the ongoing conversation around all of this right now?
Yeah, Brandon, it's like Kirby said in 2018 when I thought Georgia was wrongly left out of the 4 best scenario for a one-loss Oklahoma. They're going to change what they emphasize every year, and every committee kind of has its own flavor. Every committee has its own thing about it. Now last year's committee did take a stand and left out Florida State, even though they were undefeated, and frankly went against a lot of the political sentiment that you can't leave out an undefeated conference champ. Well, they decided that you could. They said that a one-loss Alabama and a one-loss Texas was better than an undefeated Florida State, and that was very controversial. But that was a hard stand, and I thought it was in the interest of getting the 4 best teams in there. Now you can make the argument Georgia was one of the 4 best, but unfortunately, transitive properties worked against you. Texas beat Alabama, and Alabama beat Georgia, so that's how that one shook out. Now the question that I asked Ware Manuel last night was about Alabama and Penn State. And I said, how do you measure a one-loss Penn State that doesn't have any wins against top 25 teams against a 2-loss Alabama that has 4 wins against top 25 teams? And the reason I asked that question was because Rich Clark, who's the executive director, had said before this year's committee started meeting that schedule strength would be treated with a lot of weight because schedule strength cuts through, his words, not mine, cuts through the conference play. Well, Ware Manuel's saying just the opposite. He's saying, well, these teams don't control who they play. Of course, I followed up with him on the conference call last night and said, well, do you consider who they scheduled in their non-conference games? Obviously, Georgia was very aggressive scheduling Clemson, and he said no, because these schedules are made so far in advance. So if they want to be obstinate and stick to their guns, that's fine. But, Kirby Smart makes the point that they are strictly ranking on wins and losses rather than taking a look at conference strength. And again, Rich Clark, the executive director who seems to get it, said not all wins and losses are created equally. And yet here we are listening to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee chairman treating wins and losses the same and elevating the loss column over the strength of schedule or the difficulty of games.
Yeah, we played audio of Ware Manuel about this before. And Mike, I just think it's shocking. For a lot of the people that listen to a show like this, they're busy. They've got kids doing sports. They're working 50 hours a week. They don't live and die with every word that everybody in college football says the way that we do. And I think they probably assume, well, the people in charge must know what they're doing because otherwise why would they be in charge? When you hear some of the things that comes out of their mouth, and for someone who may be on their way to like his second sales call of the day, and you hear this guy, Ware Manuel, incapable of even like comprehending what strength of schedule even means, I just think that causes somebody to like stop in their tracks and say, oh gosh, these bureaucrats aren't any more competent than the other bureaucrats in other walks of life. And I just think that people are probably shocked by that when they discover that the people in charge just may not know what they're doing. I mean, I don't want to over dramatize this, but what other conclusion could you draw?
Well, I think they know exactly what they're doing, and they're finding a way to be self-serving. I mean, when you see 4 of the top 5 teams are from the Big Ten, clearly there's an agenda. And Brandon, this goes back, and I know 6 years ago or whenever you're pretty good about giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
You are genuinely a good person, and so you assume that other people will operate with the same level of integrity and standard that you do. But that's just not how it works. People in general are self-serving, and we saw that with the 2018 College Football Playoff Committee when you had the Georgia Tech AD on there, the Florida AD on there, and yes, the Oklahoma AD. And I called them out, and I was challenged. And people said, how can you challenge these men of integrity? How can you assume that these people aren't going to do what's best for the sport as a whole? Why would you think they would put themselves first? And then lo and behold, 3 years later, we find out that the Oklahoma and Texas AD went behind the backs of their fellow, Big 12 members to join another conference. Well, here we go again. We've got a chairman who's from the Big Ten, and conveniently enough, the metric that they're choosing to emphasize is one that benefits the Big Ten, which of course means a bigger payday for the Big Ten and more exposure, hence power, hence perception shifts. If they can get more Big Ten teams in, and the way to do that is to lay the groundwork by elevating the Big Ten early in the rankings so that when Ohio State beats Indiana or vice versa, it's a top 5 loss, right? Versus Georgia beating a Tennessee team that's not even in the top 10. So there's a little bit of the self-serving prophecy there. What's amazing to me is that they would try to pull this heist, a magician with a really bad trick, in front of this national stage because everybody sees what's happening. It's not just Brandon Adams and Mike talking on DawgNation. It's Stuart Mandel of The Athletic, and it's Nicole Auerbach of whatever national outlet. The national media there's an outcry over this. Like, what is going on? I mean, Ware Manuel's got to go back to the room going, man, I got asked 3 questions about Georgia. Out of 7 or 8 questions, 3 of them were about the team with the number 1 schedule strength. And how long can he keep this debate, like you said, before the jig is up? I mean, I think Ware Manuel is ruining this for all the athletic directors in the future, because after this year, I just don't think you can put a sitting AD in this chair. To your point, it ruins their formula. It ruins what they've tried to sell us, that a 13-member committee could be effective. Now, Brandon, I'm going to flash back for just a second. When I talked with Roy Kramer a few years ago about this committee system, and Roy said this is why he went with the BCS, the formula, because he recognized that college football is a regional sport. People are incapable of the 10,000-foot objective view. That's why he put the BCS in play, which relied on a computer formula. The people were still in it, sort of, because the polls were considered, but there were these computer formulas as well where we could all sit back and see when the process started, oh, this is how it's measured. So when undefeated Auburn got left out, yeah, what a bummer. But hey, you screwed up. You scheduled an FCS team and it hurt your formula, and that's why you're not playing for a title. Now, as Kirby Smart points out, this is a moving target. What's important here? Conference championship, 1-loss record, offense, defense. I mean, they're going to change it from year to year depending on the narrative that chairman and the committee come up with.
And I'll tell you, Mike, the other guy that's in my crosshairs today is the SEC Commissioner, Greg Sankey. And listen, what we saw last night is not the playoff field. But if it were, I don't believe it will be, but if it were, you've got 3 SEC teams going on the road. You would have the theoretical benefit to Texas, who's played the easiest SEC schedule that I've ever seen. And all of this has been agreed upon and massaged by Greg Sankey every step of the way. He went from being the Big Ten's adversary to being its biggest ally, and suddenly he and Tony Petitti are meeting together, and they're in cahoots. And all of this is right now working to the detriment of his legacy members, the Ole Misses and the Bamas and the Georgias. And I think that's potentially a huge problem. And no one seems to be mentioning that right now but me. But this system that Greg Sankey has championed, it may be putting more money in the pockets of the key decision makers of the SEC, but it is not benefiting the football teams on the field and therefore the fans that support this league. I think that Greg Sankey right now has a huge problem with his main constituents. I just don't think he's taking care of his league in a proper way if the actual playoff field looks like what last night's theoretical field looked like.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. And certainly right now, Georgia looks like the sacrificial lamb that's kind of been farmed out to play this difficult schedule for high TV ratings. But still, you have to remember, Greg Sankey answers to the presidents and the athletic directors, and he's merely the guy that's carrying out their orders and their wishes. And if they say we want a television contract that's worth more money, it's up to Sankey to come up with a way to do that. And aggressive scheduling is a way to do that. Now, conversely, the Big Ten, you've seen how they've backloaded their schedule, where some of these teams aren't quite frankly playing some of the other top teams. I mean, look at Penn State and what they have left. Minnesota and Maryland, they're not playing Oregon. Was that an accident? Probably not. We look at Texas's schedule. It's much easier than Georgia. Was that an accident for Texas to have an easy first-year schedule, maybe gain some momentum, maybe gain some TV sets, some money from the high-dollar program? Perhaps not. I don't know what the algorithm was for determining the SEC schedule. I know that I didn't like the 2020 schedule. I think that's something we talked about, and how that thing, that whole thing got derived and juggled around, where I think Florida was supposed to play Alabama in the rotation, but somehow there was a pass on that game, so they didn't have to. Conversely, Georgia did. Anyway, I digress. I think you've got a good point, but I think I would reel it back in and say that Greg Sankey is merely trying to carry out the duties and what the athletic directors and the presidents wanted. Now, we can debate the schedule forever. We knew from the start this was going to be trouble when we looked at Georgia's schedule and the potential for tough games. Now, does the SEC's, here's to me the $100 million question, Brandon, or $100 billion question, whatever the contract's worth. Does the SEC's aggressive scheduling, is it so good, are the ratings so good that the SEC doesn't have to add that 9th game to add value to their contract? Because right now what's happened is the SEC programs are saying, wait a minute. They're not respecting the strength of our schedule, and you want us to add another conference game? Forget that. So what could result out of this is the SEC says, you know what? We're taking a pass. We're not going to add that 9th game. We're going to keep the conference slate at 8 games, and we're going to build that UMass game into November that's to our advantage because we're so doggone beat up from cannibalizing one another week in and week out in a very deep and talented league.
All right, Mike, there's so much to say about this, but we'll leave it there for now. My guess is we'll be arguing about different stuff or some of the same stuff again a week from now, too. So thanks for your time on the show today. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Appreciate it, Brandon. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
If I was an autocrat with total control over everything, which is obviously my goal in life, but if I was, here's what I would do. I'd get rid of the committee entirely. And if somehow there is a theoretical cap of just 4 SEC teams in the playoff, then why not just acknowledge that and say, okay, it's 4 SEC, it's 4 Big Ten. I'd give the ACC 4, I'd give the Big 12 4. I'd make it a true 16-team playoff and put the leagues in charge of deciding who their 4 teams are. And so, therefore, you try to create the most equitable schedule possible, not to protect your records, but to prove who the best teams are. And if Georgia can't make it out of the gauntlet of the SEC, then you know what? As we said before, we'll have some nice moments and some nice wins, and we'll, wish whoever does emerge well. But at least it's more fair. At least it's decided on the field. I don't want my fate decided in the boardroom. Even if Georgia's included, I don't want my fate decided in the boardroom. The NFL has a mathematical process for who makes the playoff. It's wins and losses, it's win percentage, things like that, it's tiebreakers. I think that college football would be better if there was no committee at all. And the conferences were in charge of coming up with a schedule that sort of proved who the 4 best teams were. They get to go to the playoff. The other Big 12 and ACC teams would essentially be sacrificial lambs, but who cares? At least the process of who gets in would be a little more sensible. I believe if I was in charge, I believe if I was the dictator, that's probably what I would do, and I believe it'd be a better system we have now. We'll get Davin Bellamy on all this here coming up in just a moment. Let's also get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Of course, you can give a call to Jessica Slater, great travel agent, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you everything you need to know about the best stuff going on with the Royal Caribbean here right now. What I love is when they introduce new ships, they introduce new concepts on those ships, including Pesky Parrot. Really cool new bar concept right there in the Royal Promenade when you go into Utopia of the Seas. You walk right in, you see it. It's a tropical themed bar. It makes a lot of sense on a great cruise ship like that. Just a really cool thing. And up on the pool deck, about the lime and coconut. On a ship like Utopia, lime and coconut's like 2 levels worth. It's like the best sort of outdoor kind of beach vibe bar you can ever go to. You get the view bar as well. Listen, there is no shortage of places to get a great beverage on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, including the Mason Jar, one of my favorites for sure. So talk to Jessica. She'll get you going on a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation as we head towards 2025. All right, let me do a couple of things here before we bring on Davin Bellamy. I'm going to try to make this really quick. Let me give you a nightmare scenario. What if Texas A&M wins the SEC? Like, think about this just for a moment. Like, right now, the SEC's 4 playoff teams, and for whatever reason it's capped at 4, appear to be Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Georgia. What if A&M beats Texas, therefore earns its way into the SEC championship game? And I think the formula would say perhaps Alabama might be the opponent. What if that were to occur? What if that takes place? And what if Texas A&M wins? Okay, so now you've got a scenario where a 3-loss Alabama Are they still in the playoff? They have 3 losses now, but they are also potentially punished for losing the SEC championship. This is something that some people say they don't want to do. So now you're going to put a 3-loss Alabama in the playoff? Well, what happens then? What does Tennessee say in that situation? Hold on, they've got more losses than we have, and we beat them head-to-head, and yet somehow we're not a consideration in all of this? Or what about Georgia, who is kind of at the bottom part of the at-large picks here right now, and what if that continues? I think things get really, really messy if A&M wins the SEC. And it is not that hard to imagine they would do it because they get Texas in Kyle Field. If they win that game, and then obviously anything could happen in an SEC championship, I think the crazy debates in the SEC aren't quite over with yet. By the way, speaking of A&M, did you see Mike Elko this week? I almost feel sorry for him because he was asked this question about, playing Auburn while also thinking about Texas. Texas A&M is one of the biggest regular season games I've ever seen. I mean, it is that level of big. And so he's talking about Texas, or asked about Texas, and then he's like, hey, listen, our focus, what he means to say is our focus is on Auburn, but he had Texas in the brain. He goes, listen, right now all we're doing is focused on Texas. I mean Auburn. It's one of those things where, it's just a misspeak. It's nothing but a misspeak. But boy, you want to talk about a clip that's going to come back to haunt him. And this is why it's hard to be an inexperienced head coach in the SEC, because inexperienced coaches are more likely to have misspeaks. How you project yourself publicly and represent your team is a part of the job for an SEC coach. And y'all, we said this yesterday. Auburn is just a tiny little underdog to A&M here this week. The drama of potential upsets in the SEC is far from done. And Saturday on the Plains may be an example of that. I was going to do something on Joey Galloway instead. Let me just wrap that up, and we'll call that Cruise Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and get ready to talk to our buddy Davin Bellamy here right now. And Davin, let me bring you in on what kind of has been the hot topic all day long. And there was a thing last night on TV. I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but I'll walk you through it, where Joey Galloway, the ESPN analyst, was talking about Indiana playing Ohio State on Saturday. It's like, listen, the only thing that's going to really hurt you right now is if your quarterback gets hurt. So maybe you ought to rest that guy and, basically sort of worry about what's going to happen later on, because the theory is with the Indiana ranked so high, they still make the playoff even if they lose to Ohio State on Saturday. And the thing that it leads me to is, Davin, this is the thing I want to get your opinion on. A lot of people before the playoff expanded would have said, you better be careful. You run the risk of ruining the regular season and taking away what has mattered, the week-to-week drama of college football. Some of the stuff in the Big Ten where, Indiana can lose and still make the playoff. Penn State can essentially lose its only game that matters to Ohio State, still make the playoff. Do we see evidence right now that the expansion of this playoff and how the Big Ten's being treated right now, maybe how, a team like, say, Miami and Notre Dame to a certain extent, how they're being treated? Do we see right here in front of our own eyes, do we see the regular season being devalued right now?
No doubt, man. We're playing with a dangerous game. You're playing with a dangerous game. You're already paying the players, so it's already feeling like the pros. And then you're going to start to get into where teams are going to say, okay, I may rest my player because even if we lose a game, we still have a guaranteed shot, in the playoffs. So you're playing a very risky game. The college football, playoff committee added 6 new members. And in my opinion, when I'm just looking at this, it just seems like they're tired of the same old, even though Georgia has been the best football team and been in conversation as been one of the best football teams in the last 6-7 years. But over the last 3-4 years, we've just been dominating. And, to watch Miami be ahead of us after losing to Tech, and they say it's a eye test, but Miami almost had 2-3 games where they didn't look the par and they pulled out late. But when Georgia does that, playing a SEC schedule, we fought, for it. So they're just playing a dangerous game right now. And I just think the new people that are that's voting right now are trying to shake college football up when it doesn't need to be, shaken up. Georgia has proven that we have the number 2 toughest schedule behind Oregon. And the 2 teams, and the games that we've lost have been tough games on the road. And we're being punished for one. When you schedule tougher teams, that means you're offense and defense has to exert more energy to win. When you exert more energy to win, you have more injuries. So we see a team like Georgia who signed up for the tough schedule. We start off with our players being banged up, but that's because we're playing tough teams and everybody else just can skate through. So I just think we're playing a dangerous game right now.
I think dangerous game is a great way to say that. I really do. I want to ask you about something different here for a moment. I'm guessing your blood's a little bit like mine. I don't want to be in cold weather. I want to go to the beach as much as I can. I want to be in the Caribbean as much as I can. I can't deal with winter. I've never liked winter. I want winter to be as short as it possibly can. But based on last night's ranking, let's just sort of assume this is what it is for a moment. Obviously, a lot can change before then. Georgia might be going to State College in Pennsylvania, playing that game in late December. We've never really had a lot of cold weather college football because, for the most part, the season ends in late November. Even up north, it's not that cold typically by then. By the time we get to the postseason, we're playing indoors. We're playing in warm weather locations. College football has just not really been a cold weather sport. I apologize for not knowing, but in the NFL and things like that, how many true cold weather games did you ever play in? And how impacted do you think Georgia might be if they had to play a true cold weather game? I'm not talking about 40 degrees in Lexington in November. I'm talking about like 5 degrees in Pennsylvania, 3 days before Christmas, or 4 days before Christmas. How big of a deal do you think a cold weather game might be?
Weather is definitely a big, part of, when teams come to play. And I can just speak about the NFL. I did my first 3 years in Houston, and we didn't deal with the cold weather so much. We just dealt with it being so hot during camp. And when you do the joint, practices, we went against the Detroit Lions when Matt Patricia was the coach. And, those guys being from Detroit, they came down to, Texas, and it's hot and humid. And they weren't even able to get through the warm-up. So weather does matter because depending on the area you're playing in, you train in that environment. You train in that climate. So just Georgia being an SEC team and most of our guys being from, the South, man, it's tough when you start to talk about Penn State because that does matter. That does matter. Typically playing football in the hot weather versus the cold weather, it is a difference. Your fingers hurt more. It takes longer to warm up. And if you're not trained to that environment, then it definitely, I think, plays a toll on the team that has the home field advantage. And this is where the playoffs can get tricky because Georgia shouldn't even be in that situation if the playoffs were to start today. Now you're talking about weather starting to affect the game. But at the end of the day, Brandon, these guys are pros now. These guys have Lambo trucks. These guys, so they're being asked to be comfortable in the uncomfortable, situations. So, with this new college football rules, they're all about making money to pay these players.
Yeah.
So adding more game and adding more of an anxiety to the game, is a part of being a pro.
I want to finish in a moment by talking about what we saw against Tennessee this past Saturday. But let me ask you one follow-up on this. And, I lean on your experience as a player because you obviously know this in a way that I don't. But my assumption is that even with the cold weather, I think I'd still rather go up there and play Penn State because the truth is, the Penn State players don't want to play in that cold weather either. They may be from Pennsylvania, but they haven't played a ton of games in late December either in their lifetime. And so, therefore, it's cold for them, too. Now, it's going to be really cold for those of us who are Georgians, but it's going to be pretty cold for them, too. It's not like they're going to be loving life necessarily. I think I would rather go up there and play them, even if it's like 5 degrees. I think I'd rather do that than have to go back to Oxford or back to Tuscaloosa, because there is not one thing that would stop the committee from saying, guess what, Georgia? We know you played all these tough road games. Now you're going to go play another one. You're going to go play Ole Miss again in Oxford. You're going to go play Alabama again on the road. Do you know what those stadiums would be like for the first ever playoff game ever played in a home stadium, what that environment would be like? I think if Georgia had to go on the road, I'd take my chances against one of these paper tiger Big Ten teams, even in the freezing cold, over having to go back and play one of these SEC teams again with the fans breathing down my neck the whole time.
Right. And that's the beauty of playing in this tough conference is it prepares you for the long run, man. And, if you can get through the SEC, when you start to get into the college football playoffs, look, I'll tell you a quick story. When it was our year going in and we're watching the college football playoffs to see who we play, we play Auburn in the SEC championship. Yeah. So, I can say this now, but we prayed that Bama didn't get in.
Okay.
We wanted to face Clemson, so I mean, and we thought, Bama didn't deserve to get in because they did not participate in the SEC. And we knew when we played them, they would play with a vengeance. And they were a well-seasoned team that performs well in high anxiety games. So we didn't want them to get in because we did not want to face another SEC team. So just to bring up what you're saying, that's, perfectly right. I don't think the weather would be the equalizer of the teams. I just think we're so much a better team and so much more well-coached than Penn State and just so much more explosive on offense that the weather wouldn't manage those 14, 15-point spread. But I definitely agree. I do not want to see another SEC team when it's time to get, to where we're trying to get to.
Well, here's the other thing, too, and you know this because you've been through this. These poor Georgia players, Kirby Smart for 2 weeks would have them up in like Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan or somewhere like that, just practicing in like negative 50-degree weather. Like he'd move them to Canada or Alaska or somewhere. It'd be like if you watch Rocky IV when you're a kid, you have like out there pushing the plow in the snow. Kirby would have them living up there in like the Northwest Territory or something to get used to that cold weather. These poor Georgia players would come back home, rosy cheeks and everything else because Kirby would do something to give them that cold weather as soon as he possibly could.
You're absolutely right. And what he always does during camp, he always has Marines come and talk to us. So one thing the Marines always said, and I remember this specific message my senior year of, the course that you do before you go out and do your mission. So let's say they got to go get Bin Laden or something.
Yeah.
The assimilation is going to be much tougher than what you're actually doing. So if we're planning on playing in 15-degree weather, just off the way Kirby's program, he'd have us in negative 15 weather.
That's right.
Just trying to prepare. So, yeah.
That is exactly right. All right, before we let you go, obviously it was a good day for Georgia on Saturday against Tennessee. Looking back on it, what did you like from it? And I guess maybe more importantly, how much do you think what we saw, both sides of the ball, how much do you think that can now sort of transfer and be just sort of a part of what Georgia is the rest of the way?
Well, the big thing is we have, UMass this week. Yeah. So this is a game that you're supposed to dominate, and I'm pretty sure we will. But this is where you kind of fine-tune on your identity. And I spoke about, on the post-game show of, how the defense plays so aggressive. That comes off of how, Coach Shum called a game. The defensive players can only react to what your, coach is calling. So I just think last week on the defensive end, we were more aggressive and we more blitzed and brought more pressure to dictate what the offense was doing versus sitting back and letting the offense dictate what we were doing. I think we did a great job of that last week. And on the offensive side of the ball, I think we just got the tight ends involved. Whenever you get the tight ends involved, you're attacking the middle of the field, in between the hashes, and that helps the quarterback out a lot. So you kind of took the hard throws out of Beck's hand and got the tight ends involved. So I think if you start to see that and us use the UMass game to just magnify those two things I brought up, I definitely think we're on the right pace and we're starting to peak. We have the players to compete how we competed last week. I think it's just the coaching staff's not getting too cute and just letting the players, do what they do.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Davin, I always love your insight into all of this. I appreciate you being on the show today. We're looking forward to talking to you again after the UMass game on Saturday, and hopefully it's a big win. Hopefully it's a chance to get a lot of young guys involved and maybe some – listen, you got to take care of business first, but maybe some rest for a few guys and then getting ready for that Tech game on the other side of that. That's going to be a big one too. So, Davin, we appreciate your time on the program here today.
Sounds good, man. See you Saturday. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed. Always really good stuff from our buddy Davin Bellamy with all that. Also good stuff as well from our friends at Dr. Pepper. I love everything about a Dr. Pepper. In fact, it's the thing I look forward to right when the show is done. Boom, grabbing that Dr. Pepper and enjoying all of that, and I want you to enjoy that too. Getting ready for a big football weekend here. Obviously, Dr. Pepper, a great thing on that. So your local Kroger, wherever you're doing your shopping, stop by and get, whether it's the strawberries and cream, whether it's the Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar, the Diet Dr. Pepper, the regular Dr. Pepper, always really good, too. It's also a big part of my holiday time, too. I always love a little Dr. Pepper around the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, everything else. So stop by, stock up, and get ready for a really fun run through the end of the season and a great holiday time there as well. Because when it comes to our friends at Dr. Pepper, it's a pepper thing. Also, shout out to our friends at Zagoria Law as well. I love the fact that Zagoria Law right now doing a great job taking care of people during a very important time of their life. If you've been bitten by a dog, listen, it's sort of fun to talk about your favorite drink or something, awesome to do that kind of stuff. But sometimes it's not fun to talk about, being wrongfully harmed and looking at medical bills or in some cases just sort of trauma, pain and suffering. And saying somebody needs to do something for me in this situation. This wasn't my fault. Someone was negligent. And the same way that you've got a responsibility to kind of manage your vehicle the right way or take care of your property the right way, taking care of your dog is also an important part of that too. So if a dog gets loose, if it bites you, if it knocks you down, breaks your arm, or someone you love hasn't been impacted by that, our friends at Zagoria Law want to provide you help. They literally wrote the book about how to win these types of cases. They are the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. So I want you to give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's 833-GA-DOG-BITE. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That's ZAGORIA, ZagoriaLaw.com today. So Golden Shoe here, our buddy George on Tap, always so good. I gave you the gif here of the famous comedian. Is that Jim Gaffigan? Is that guy's name? I always get the comedians confused. I believe that's Jim Gaffigan, maybe. I am being told it is Jim Gaffigan. And he's kind of using the magic 8-ball here, just essentially just guessing and doing the best he can. George on Tap says it's a live look at the committee picking the top 12, and George on Tap is right about this, as he is so many things. So we'll give him a golden shoe there for that. The committee gets nothing from us, though. They may get our boot, but they don't get our golden shoe, not even close to it. And by the way, speaking of free Eddie, which you see there on the screen, I am being told, I don't have anything to confirm on this right now, but I am being told there could be an Eddie-related update here coming soon. When Eddie does feel free again, when we're heading towards something on that, we may be getting an update on that very soon. Lousy, stinking Gators. Listen, you may be mad about how the playoff's treating you, but the playoff committee's never even heard of Florida. So keep perspective there on that. 1,474 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see all of you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. The one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. Let us get some comments here. First one I see is Free Durden, who says, "Go Army, beat Notre Dame." I'd love to see that. Look, I'd love to see Army beat Notre Dame. I'd kind of like to, I'm sort of a little bit of a glutton for punishment, I guess. I'd kind of like to see Army beat Notre Dame and watch the committee still put Notre Dame in the playoff. I just think it'd be funny because just it'd be all transparency, completely, out there in the open for everybody to see. I definitely would. What if Kentucky beat Texas on Saturday? I don't think that's going to happen, but what if it did? Oh my gosh, I'd love to see that. Do we think there's any chance that Ole Miss could be on upset alert with Florida on Saturday? I sort of think that seeing Florida beat LSU, and right now Ole Miss is just a better team than LSU, even though LSU beat them, I sort of think that probably wakes Ole Miss up if they were any chance of looking ahead to Mississippi State or hanging a mission accomplished banner on the season. I think that Florida's performance against LSU probably stirs them from the slumber a bit. It's going to be a fun couple of weeks. Here's the thing. I'm mad, but I'm sort of entertained by having something to be mad about. Does that make sense? Like a guy like down in the comment section, sometimes on those shows that we do at night, because of the way our platform works, I see all the comments kind of combined together and they go so fast, I can't even remember who says what. But somebody's like, I'm not going to lie, it'd be kind of fun to go to Penn State. There's a part of me that's like, if we're sure that Georgia has to play somebody on the road, I'm mad that Georgia might be forced to do that, but in a way, this is sort of fun. I'm entertained by having all this to be mad about. Craig Wade says maybe if they didn't beat LSU, Florida might be a live dog, but Ole Miss is going to be ready. I sort of think that's probably true. I do. I mean, listen, and y'all know, especially if you're with us during this portion of the show, because this is a little bit more of a long-standing group of people. Y'all know I've been pretty critical of Lane Kiffin over the years. Well, listen, I mean, one way or another, Lane, even if it was begrudgingly, Kiffin has obviously earned my respect. He clearly took care of Georgia the other day, but he's also put a really strong roster together. I mean, if I've criticized Kiffin before for not always being a serious coach, I can't really say that anymore. And some of the antics type stuff that I don't always like, the truth is that when he spoke up and said, why do the certain teams always get night games, LSU being the number one example of that in the SEC, somebody needed to say that. Somebody needed to say that, and Kiffin did. And when Kiffin said nobody wants to play in the SEC championship, as he did the other day, once again, somebody sort of needed to say that too. Like, I've always been pretty anti-Kiffin, but on the field and with some of his comments here this year, strange new respect. You got to admit, strange new respect. By the way, something I meant to also mention during the show, this is a pretty big deal. So the former Bama center, now at Ohio State, Seth McLaughlin, is it Seth McLaughlin, right? He's injured. He tore his Achilles. That's a very big deal for Ohio State. Very big deal for Ohio State. Because this is not the first offensive line injury Ohio State's dealt with. And if we had like Joey Bucknut, sitting right next to us, the one thing he would say is everybody in Columbus, their biggest concern was lack of depth along the offensive line. And now you've got a situation where your two best linemen, I think their best tackle, and now McLaughlin, who was having a very good year as a center after being scapegoated for Alabama's struggles from a year ago in the playoff. Now he's got a torn Achilles. Like, this is a big deal for Ohio State. Big deal. I think we have a tendency to overrate an individual injury, but sometimes we may underestimate the importance of a series of injuries. When you've got multiple injuries like this along the offensive line, there's a chance this is a different version of Ohio State, really is. There's a chance this is a different version of Ohio State. Garrison Tucker says, give UGA Indiana, please. I'm telling you right now, Georgia beat Indiana by 28 points at least, and that's me being conservative. And I know it makes me sound like a redneck. It's like, this is the stuff that people hate. They hate this kind of stuff. I don't have any respect for Indiana at all. At all. Not only do I not think they could beat Georgia, I don't think they could beat Ole Miss. I don't think they could beat Tennessee. I don't. And one of these days, the coach, Kurt Cignetti, kind of traveling a little bit of a similar path to what Kalen DeBoer has traveled. Maybe Cignetti, one day is in the SEC. Maybe he's coaching one of these teams. Maybe he's the next hot thing. Very well could be. Indiana does not exist on my radar at all. And I don't want to hear, well, you got to understand, they rank blah, 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 and the SP plus and the blah, 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 blah. All of that, as far as I'm concerned, is a bunch of nonsense. What about Indiana is any different than TCU? TCU had, what's his name at quarterback? I've already forgotten him. TCU had won the Big 12. TCU was, all the rave. It was 65-7. Now, it may not be 65-7 for Georgia against Indiana because, frankly, this ain't that same version of Georgia anymore. But it ain't going to be close. It's not going to be close. And, by the way, Bloomington also gets really cold, too. For those of you who are in Indianapolis for the national championship, if it gets colder than that anywhere, I don't want to feel it. It might be cold going to Indianapolis or Bloomington if you had to go there, which, by then maybe you're not. But I don't think 5 seconds about Indiana. I don't. Taylor Russell says Arkansas, Indiana be a pick'em. On a good day, Arkansas can move the football on a good day. And if you told me for my playoff life, I either had to go play Arkansas in a full stadium or go play at Indiana, I'd probably choose Arkansas, but only just barely. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says, I don't care if we had to go up to Happy. By the way, and Jonathan's right. If they're going to stick Georgia in Happy Valley, they're going to make sure to find a way to make that be the night game. And, because Penn State people are already mad. Now, this is weird. It's kind of funny, like our allegiance shifts depending on what the topic is. I have zero respect for James Franklin, Penn State on the field, but I am on their side when it comes to their anger about their wideout game being stolen from them. They had to play Ohio State at noon and got stuck playing their wideout game against Washington. I'm sort of on their side about that. So they're already kind of ornery about the fact they didn't have a wideout game this year of consequence. They had to play a Washington team they're going to beat no matter what. So if they get their second chance at a wideout at night, that could be pretty rough. That could be pretty rough because, like, while the players aren't used to cold weather, the fans kind of are. If you've lived in Pennsylvania your whole life, you know what cold winter feels like. You have cold weather clothes. Honestly, Georgia fans don't even have cold weather clothes. Like Georgia fans up in like Indianapolis in the national championship, man, they weren't dressed right. They don't own like sweaters and like there's a lot of like fleecy vests. Georgia fans don't own that kind of clothes. You get Georgia fans up there wearing the same like golf clothes, little quarter zip pullover. That's the only clothes they own. All right, let's get some Facebook comments here for a moment. Let us see what's going on here. Hold on one second. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. On Facebook, we'll get ready to pull that up here. But yeah, so I mean, if Georgia has to go there, it's going to be. I mean, can you imagine a wideout in the snow? Like how crazy that'd be. But maybe this will prove to be famous last words. But the honest truth is, I don't think. Hold on, I got to try to. Where's our show? I don't think the Penn State players would want to play in the cold weather any more than Georgia does. Now, the Penn State fans would be excited about it because they live in cold weather their entire life. They feel like if somebody else has got to endure it, why wouldn't we have to endure it? But so why am I seeing yesterday's show on Facebook? I don't know what that is. Okay, here this is. But the Penn State players, they don't want to play in that cold weather. None of those guys have ever played in a cold weather game before, right? Because the Big Ten season ends the last week in November. Ain't none of them playing in the playoffs, so they don't, they're not doing that. Bowl games are all relatively warm weather or indoors. I don't think the Penn State players would be any more ready for a true cold weather game than Georgia would be. Although we would all be miserable going up there. By the way, Matt Rugvina says, fun fact, I lived in Bloomington for 1 year, my third grade. Not a whole lot going on up there. I'm imagining that's the case. Blair Davis says, if Georgia plays like they did against Tennessee, they can beat anybody. That's exactly right. And, my sort of like, Mike was sort of sharing his conspiracy theory earlier. My conspiracy theory is different. I don't think this committee cares who wins. They just don't want the 4 semifinal teams to be 3 from the SEC. They just don't want that. They're going to try to stack the deck so it's not like SEC, and Ohio State. They don't want that. They don't want that. Miriam Corbin says, I think she's talking about State College. It's not an easy place to get to. I have heard that. I have heard it's not an easy place to get to. So now some of y'all know we had to drive to Cooperstown this summer. I drove straight up the gut of Pennsylvania to do that. The middle part of that state's beautiful. I mean, I'm telling you right now, listen, I got no beef with Pennsylvania other than the typical grievance against the Big Ten. The state of Pennsylvania, the middle part of the state's gorgeous, beautiful farmland, beautiful kind of sort of, if not quite mountain, a little bit, although I guess you do have like some mountains, mountain, hilly terrain, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So I have no idea, where anybody's be flying to or anything like that. I do know famously State College does not have an airport. That's been kind of a big deal for Penn State fans for a while. Kent Holcomb says, I wish the CFP had ranked us higher, but that being said, we control our own destiny. We got to win 2 games and play whoever they throw in front of us. Yeah, so, I mean, I do come back to this, Kent. I think Georgia mostly controls its own destiny. But I will say what I said a minute ago. What if A&M wins the SEC? And now you've got 10-2 Texas. I assume they're eliminated. What if A&M beats Alabama? Very realistic possibility in the SEC championship. And now you've got 3-loss Bama who beat Georgia with also and I hate to use the word like politics because it kind of conjures up bad stuff, but the sort of political issue of, well, can you really punish a team for losing its conference championship game? Georgia fans would say you sure can because you did punish us last year. But that's complicated. I think that Tennessee's going to come back into this and say, well, hold on. How are you going to leave us out for an Alabama team who has more losses than we do? We also beat them head-to-head. So I think that Georgia at 10-2 is almost certainly in the playoff. They're like a 90% chance. But I don't think it's 100. I don't think it's 100. I don't, although I do think, and that's why like where Georgia's ranked somewhat matters, is because as long as they are like the 4th of the SEC teams, they're always the most vulnerable. And that's why my issue is with Texas so much. Texas should be ranked behind Georgia. Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama should have the most solid playoff footing right now. And Texas should, if anybody needs a little help, it ought to be Texas. Brian Whitaker says it's beautiful up that way, B.A. I just came back from New York, was there for 3 weeks. Me and my dad drove up there. We also went to the Baseball Hall of Fame while we were there. It was amazing. Yeah, honestly, like, we went to the Hall of Fame while I was there, and I really liked it. I knew I would, but I liked it even more than I thought I did. Cooperstown Village is also really cool, really, really cool. But the area, like, all through, like, that Pennsylvania, I mean, I love to drive. I've said before, I could easily be a truck driver, I'm not sure I could drive the truck, but the actual driving part, I could on the road. I like all that kind of stuff. I just do. I mean, there's a good chance if Georgia played in State College, I'd just get in the car and drive to there. I just like it. I would have driven to Austin if I didn't have to be back, so quickly on Monday. I just like driving. That area up there is beautiful, beautiful. And you don't really think about it because you sort of think about like Pennsylvania being like Pittsburgh to the west and Philadelphia to the east. But in the middle, that's God's country. I mean, it's good-looking stuff right there in the middle of that state, for sure. Alan Verbanchik, Bill Sanders talking about, he said the loser of that game will not drop more than 2 or 3 spots, no matter which one it is. Is that the SEC championship? Oh, Indiana, Ohio State. Yeah. Now, while we're just sort of throwing all the conspiracies out there, let me give you this one. And I wish I didn't mean this, but I do. Y'all watch that officiating on Saturday. Georgia's, is Ohio State, Indiana, is that noon start? Is that big noon kickoff? So you'll have to, I guess, overlap that. Am I right about that? Is that big noon for Indiana and Ohio State? Y'all watch that. Yeah, I'm being told, yes, it is noon kick. Y'all watch that officiating. Because nothing good comes from Ohio State winning that game 50-0. Nothing good comes from Ohio State winning that game 50-0. Now, I'm not saying the Big Ten wants Indiana to win, but sort of a gentleman's agreement to kind of go down with some style and some grace. Y'all watch that. T.A. Stovall says, I believe it's Tay Stovall, says that Penn State, BYU, Indiana will get a beat down like TCU. I have no reason to think otherwise. Tay, I'm right there with you. I have no reason to think otherwise. There is not an ounce of me that's like, oh, maybe this time it's different. It hasn't been different. It won't be different. Everything for me always comes down to give me a chance. I'm going to say me as if I was Georgia for a second. Give me a chance to play somebody outside the SEC in sort of a high-stakes elimination style game. That always goes well for Georgia. It always goes well for Georgia. Hey, you're on the road against one of these tough SEC teams. Sometimes it's just not your day. And I wish they were all easy, but games like that are just not going to be easy. But when Georgia has a chance to play Clemson on a neutral or Oregon on a neutral or, Michigan on a neutral, TCU on a neutral, and that team was the reigning Big 12 champs. We were told that was something special at the time. It always seems to go well for Georgia. And even last year's bowl game that we're sort of told that didn't count. The truth is, the one thing that Georgia's really good at, exposing lies. And last year, when it comes to the Florida State game, that, if Georgia wins that game, like, say, 37-10, right? It's like kind of a blowout, sort of a sham that a team like Florida State's playing in a situation like this, having tapped out and given up on the entire season. But it's not too obvious. Nobody really cares. But 63-3 is a problem. And they're just not a lot of teams, even against a Florida State team like that, that's going to win the game 63-3. So what Georgia does, they win a game like this so bad that it almost deserves comment. Well, of course, a game like this shouldn't even be played if it's 63-3. Same type of deal the year before. It's like, well, if TCU, sort of the feel-good, plucky underdog, gets in, yeah, they probably can't win a national championship, but it's not so bad to put them in the playoff. When Georgia beats them 65-7, the only obvious response to that is, of course, a team like TCU has got no business being in the playoff. Frankly, it's dangerous to have them in the playoff. Like, they get hurt. They don't belong on that field. It's dangerous. Georgia has the ability to expose the lies in the sport. The lie that TCU is sort of playing the same brand of football that everybody else is, and that, the same, like the fact that last year's Orange Bowl should even be played. Georgia sort of is the truth serum. And I think that there could be a big-time reckoning coming if you'll just let Georgia play one of these other teams. Play them in their building, by the way. I think the outcome is the same. Smooth Smith says that Smooth, no middle name Smith, says Georgia broke Florida State, and yes, they did. I believe that's the case. Isha Murphy says, could you have so the Zoom link in the comment section. So for the post-game show, we'll do that. We'll make sure you get a chance to see that for sure. We'll try to make sure it's pinned correctly. We'll try to do that, Isha. Thank you for that. We'll try to do that. Brandon Griffin says the solution is to have each conference become their own league, their own playoff championships, then have the league champions play for the title. That's sort of what I was saying a moment ago. And for me, it's almost like the high school playoffs where each region has 4 teams that go on to the state playoffs. And you get determined by your win-loss record, things like that, how you perform in the region. Honestly, I'd be okay with a 16-team playoff and letting a couple of more of these like Tomato Can, ACC, or Big 12 teams into the tournament if it meant we had a more sensible way of deciding which SEC teams got to be in and what happened with those teams once they got in. In other words, if all we can have is 4 SEC teams in the playoff and the Big Ten gets 4 teams in the playoff no matter what, then let's put the responsibility for choosing the 4 SEC teams and how they should be appropriately seated. Let's put that responsibility with the SEC. So create a schedule that's balanced and fair. Use your pods or use your like semifinals, additional rounds of your own league playoff, whatever. Do something to determine who the 4 best teams truly are, and then turn them loose. And if they come back without the national championship, then they got nobody to blame but themselves. But don't let a committee do what could be done on the field. At this point in time, I want no more committees. No more committees. The committee has never really gotten it right. Some years it's worse than others. Last year was a travesty. This year's shaping up to be, it's just too big of a job for them. They don't want the job. What's the phrase that people say? They don't want that smoke. They're like the kid playing left field who's just hoping the ball doesn't get hit to them. They just hope the ball doesn't get hit to them. This committee does not want to be put into a situation where they have to say, we think this team is better than the other, and here's why we think that. They don't have the guts to make that decision. They don't have the guts to talk about that. They're hoping that the records, well, they're undefeated. They have to be in. They hope they get saved by the records because they don't have the guts to make qualitative analysis, and therefore they don't actually have a reason for existing. Let's get a few more. Let's go to DawgNation.com here. UGA Marine says you can't say strength of schedule matters, then allow Big 12 to have 4 teams, ACC to have 4 teams. What I mean by that is if this is all this is going to be, I would rather just let more teams in that don't deserve to be there so that we can do a better job of deciding which SEC teams are supposed to be in and how they're supposed to be seated. I'd rather just do that because right now you've got as big an issue with Texas as you do Indiana or Penn State. So my point is I would be willing to make compromises in other places to take this away from the committee because strength of schedule already doesn't matter. It already doesn't matter. So you might as well move forward in a universe where it just doesn't matter at all because it just clearly doesn't matter. Savannah Bryant says nobody ever mentions that Ole Miss, Bama, and Vols have bad losses. You can knock them for bad losses. Georgia's losses are obviously not bad, but that's not something I choose to have beef with. I'm not mad at Ole Miss or Alabama. They beat Georgia, and Ole Miss beat Georgia pretty convincingly. And if Ole Miss goes on to win the national championship, they may just be better than Georgia. They might. And listen, Georgia could have beaten Alabama, and some say maybe they should have. But the truth is, Alabama dominated Georgia in the first quarter. They did. And they kind of took their foot off the gas. They kind of got sloppy. Georgia almost made them pay for it. But the truth is, Alabama won the game. So, yeah, maybe Ole Miss got a bad loss to Kentucky. Yeah, I don't really know that Vanderbilt this year actually counts as a bad loss for Alabama. But even if it does, in a year where everybody loses, and eventually I believe everybody will, including Oregon, in a year in which everybody has losses, I'm sort of more interested in who you've beaten. Alabama has beaten plenty of good teams, and they've beaten many of them handily. I've got no argument with Alabama being ahead of Georgia right now. I really don't. I've got no argument with Ole Miss being ahead of Georgia. I don't think Texas should be ahead of Georgia. I don't. And I don't think Indiana, Penn State, Miami, or Notre Dame should be ahead of Georgia. And that's just sort of where I am on all of this. Brandon Griffin says, could the SEC just take their ball and go home and basically form their own league? They very well could. And maybe this is where all this is heading. And maybe that's just better for all of us because the honest truth is we just care about football in a way the rest of the sport doesn't. And the reason why this sport always gets tied up in knots is because a lot of people put a lot of time and money in trying to pretend that isn't true. That somehow it's all basically just the same. BYU, that's the same as Ole Miss. Indiana, that's the same as Georgia. It's all basically the same. Of course, that's not the case. So since we can't really convincingly pretend that it's all the same, then maybe it should just be completely different and separate. But honestly, if that does happen, even if it's the obvious next step, it's going to be sad. I mean, it's going to be sad, right? I mean, I think the playoff could be a great thing. When we moved from BCS to 14 playoff, I was thrilled. And I have mostly enjoyed that. I love doing I don't get paid really for doing the ranking shows at night. My boss doesn't care if we do those. There's not some huge business gain from that. I actually kind of do those because I like doing them. If I said next week we're not doing one, there's not one person in our chain of command who's going to be like, hey, what happened to this show? We were counting on this show. No one cares about that show. I do it because I like doing it. That really is the truth. And Connor's kind of the same way. We just sort of like doing it. I like the playoff. I don't like the people in charge of the playoff. And I think that if you gave them too much authority, they would ruin something that's essentially unruinable. I mean, do you know how hard it is to mess up college football, a sport that's as much fun as this is? But if you let unqualified people have enough access to the sort of mainframe, there's no end to the damage they could do. And that's sort of my feeling on that. JP on the subject of Notre Dame losing at Northern Illinois. I mean, it's true. It's true. And you got a couple things going on there. You got thing number one, well, of course, Notre Dame's going to get the benefit of the doubt. It's just a fact. It's not even worth debating. Notre Dame gets the benefit of the doubt because it is Notre Dame. Notre Dame does have a really sizable following. They really, really do. And thing number two is the committee does not like results early in the season to be seen as, well, that's it. It's over with. It's settled. No more reason to pay attention. They like to keep their options open. They like to keep everybody involved as long into the year as possible because ultimately the committee is doing the bidding of the sport at large, the sort of unseen powers that be, and they like the idea of as many teams as possible being involved into as deep as the season as possible. So the forgiveness for a loss against Northern Illinois is sort of true because it's Notre Dame, but it's also true because of the fact of, well, it's never really over for anybody. No one, unless they just have a losing record, no one really ends their chances of success, too early into the year. Savannah Bryant says that the strength of record metric is designed to evaluate other teams against your schedule. That's why Georgia's number 2. Very few teams would do better against Georgia. Strength of record was designed for college football playoff, and they are not using it. See, here's the problem. This really is the case. So as a way of justifying their job, and anybody who's like I've never done this, but a lot of media people have, they'll do this like mock. You ever go to like mock trial when you're in high school, or like I went to Boys State. I hated it. Gosh, I hated that so bad. But I went to Boys State. We have to like pretend to be in like the legislature or something like that. Well, they have sort of like a mock CFP like committee thing that media types get a chance to do, and they like treat you like the committee. They don't let you stay in like the $1,000 a night hotel suite, but they do treat you like the committee. And one of the things they love to do is let you know how much data they have access to, reams of paper on all this kind of stuff. So yeah, as I think it was JP said this, whichever commenter said this. No, it was Savannah Bryant, I think. Strength of record would be one of the data points they probably have access to. These people don't understand that. And it's like one like piece of paper in a stack of like 1,000 sheets of paper. It really is paralysis by analysis. They've got all this stuff. They don't know what any of it means. They don't know. They don't know. They don't know. They don't know. If you gave them 6 months to explain strength of record, they couldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you what that means. Couldn't tell you how it's tabulated. They don't know. They don't know. So they stare at all this stuff. They're overwhelmed by the information, and they just sort of revert back to saying, well, this team hasn't been beaten yet. This team's only lost one game yet. That's just like through a sort of paralysis by analysis, they just end up doing what your Aunt Gertrude could do, which is, well, if they've got a better record, they must be a better team. Savannah Bryant says they don't know or they don't care. I think that's an interesting question. There is one thing this committee cares about. There's one thing this committee cares about. They care who watches. They don't care who wins. They care who watches. And like a lot of sort of like, bureaucratic blobs, they are not idiots at the only thing they care about. Last year's CFP ratings were through the roof. Was it a proper reflection of the 4 best teams in the country? Most of us would say no, because Georgia wasn't even close to being included, seemingly. But were the ratings good? Yes. Were the ratings better than if Georgia would have been in? Probably so, even though Georgia gets high TV ratings. Georgia, in addition to an Alabama, with Georgia perhaps, beating – what if Georgia played Washington? How bad would that game have been? That's just probably the kind of thing they don't want in this year's semifinal. They don't want 3 SEC teams. So they're going to put SEC teams on the road. And I'm still on guard for this. Eventually they may force a team like Georgia to play another SEC team. Therefore, that's one fewer SEC team we have to worry about. That's the kind of thing they care about. And this is, by the way, why, and after this we got to go. This is why people say, what if they just televised the meeting? Y'all, the meeting isn't even a real thing. And this is one of those things that you got to understand. This is the way that all big entities like this work. We saw some of this during COVID when, like, the Big Ten originally decided not to play, and the question, I think, was posed to one of the university presidents of, well, who voted which way? And he said, and this is one of those things that's really important to file away. He said, we didn't vote. There is something about like really powerful people in sort of a smoke-filled room where powerful people are making important decisions. You sort of don't have to vote. Like, you just sort of know. There's kind of a meeting before the meeting where the real decisions are made, and the meeting is only a way of getting buy-in from the other people on there. And in the committee, and I've been saying this since 2014, the only people who have any real power to determine who makes the playoff are the athletic directors. And the athletic directors are always a majority of the people on the committee. That the Condoleezza Rices and what's his name, the old Notre Dame coach that was on there, or there's all these names you've heard of on the committee. Y'all, they don't have any say in who makes the playoff. They're there to make it look good. And it's probably kind of a fun thing to do because you do get treated pretty well. You get to travel around and well-fed, nice hotel suites. So they're happy to be on the committee. It's kind of probably a prestigious honor. And I'm sure they maybe are made to feel like their voice matters. I can promise you this. When it comes especially to that final ranking at the very end, when it comes to who's actually making the playoff, that has been decided way before the committee meets on anything. And the reason why it's not televised or there's not a transcript available is because it's not a real meeting. There's no vote. It's just a thing that, watch a movie. Powerful people get together. Like the mob boss orders the hit. He doesn't say, hey, go kill this guy. He says, hey, maybe you should go talk to so-and-so. And anybody who's ever seen a movie knows what that means. Powerful people don't give specific direction. They certainly don't leave a paper trail. They just sort of know. And the real people who run the college football playoff, they just sort of know what they want to do. And there's never a vote taken on any of this stuff. All right. Let's get one final comment on Facebook and then YouTube. Then we're going to go. Robert Weaver says the Dogs are in a good position. They are number 10, playing 2 teams left. They should beat Texas A&M. Beating Texas, winning the SEC championship might bump them somehow. I do really think that y'all got to be, and it may not knock Georgia out of the playoff. It just may make people mad about Alabama getting in with 3 losses. But Tennessee would be furious, by the way. I feel the same way about Tennessee that y'all do. But if I'm a Tennessee fan, I'm like, how come nobody's even considering us at all? Now, they don't deserve to be in over Georgia, but like the fact that Tennessee's not even a consideration when they may have very well be 10-2 having beaten Alabama, that's pretty weird, right? That's pretty wild. And I think that A&M, if they were to win the SEC, only makes that even more true. But I do generally agree that, hey, if Georgia's at 10-2, even if they're going on the road, but if they're playing, if they played the path that the committee gave them last night, Penn State on the road, Miami on a neutral. Yeah, you can't do much better than that. You can't do much better than that. And in a year like this, I guess anything's possible. I'd feel pretty good about Georgia being in the semifinals. And after that, who knows what happens. But if you told me I'd have a Penn State wherever you want to play it, Miami wherever you want to play it, which I guess would be the Orange Bowl, which is kind of funny. If you told me, that pathway to the college football playoff semifinals, I don't think you'd have much to complain about. I really don't. Y'all, I am so late. Let me get one more on YouTube. Yeah, DMart42 agrees. DMart42 agrees. All right, we got to go. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust them and all that, including heating systems at some point in time. If we're all watching Georgia against Penn State in the freezing cold weather, that means it's going to be cold here too. That means you need to get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. RS Andrews will let you do that. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. They'll take good care of you. I'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then.